I mean, how many people have slept in that bed before you? How many of them were sick? How many of them lost their minds? How many of them died?
Hotel rooms are a bit unsettling. Stephen King isn't the first person to make this observation, and he won't be the last. The odd neutral decor, the smell, and of course, who was in the room last, and what kind of person were they, and what did they do while they were in that same room. The film 1408 is based on a story by Stephen King. Originally from an audiobook collection called Blood and Smoke in 1999, it would go to print in Everything's Eventual in 2001, then put to the screen in 2007. Like most stories that get adapted to the screen, there's a difference from the book, but unlike most films based off a written story, this film creates something that expands, and it works. We get a backstory from our main character, Michael Inslin, and this backstory is what creates something I think that puts this film in a category of better than the book. Mike Inslin, played by John Cusack, lost his daughter Katie to an illness and destroyed his marriage with Lily due to his inability to cope with her death. Mike goes through the 5 stages of grief throughout this film: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, acceptance. It's not as subtle as we might think, but it isn't exactly something we would grasp after a first viewing due to many of the unsettling moments happening on the screen. The manager of the Dolphin Hotel, Mr. Olin, played by Samuel L. Jackson, will nearly stop at nothing to convince Mike not to stay in room 1408. Unfortunately, Michael Inslin is persistent and stubborn. He is determined to stay in the room.
I'm still staying.
Damn it to hell!
I'm sorry.
Mike says he isn't afraid. He spends his days staying in haunted rooms and writes books about said experiences. But his experience tells him that the supernatural is just another way to trick tourists and make a fun story.
Because I know that ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties don't exist. Even if they did, there's no God to protect us from them, is there?
Mike doesn't believe in an afterlife or the supernatural. He hasn't seen proof. So after a long talk and debate with Mr. Olin, he finally allows Mike to stay in room 1408. And here is where Mike will have to lose his mind to find his heart.
You're gonna have to try harder, asshole!
Michael Inslin immediately feels like this is a joke.
This is it?
He walks around the room, judging it at face value, in disbelief that this is the room that built up such high expectations. It doesn't take long for the room to begin the skin-ripping terror that Mike will alone have to endure. The room leaves chocolates on his pillow, but Mike was convinced it was all a performance by the hotel. He begins searching his room, even believes that they might have drugged him.
We've only just begun to live.
Mike's anger begins to grow after his hand is slammed by the window by some unknown force, breaking skin and causing him some pain. He breaks down on the phone, screaming he is hurt and is ready to check out, still in denial that it's the room he's dealing with at this point.
You're an idiot! I'm gonna sue your ass! I'm gonna take legal action! What's wrong with you?
Mike begins to negotiate in his head the possibility that he isn't real, that maybe it's all a nightmare.
Maybe I'm just having a nightmare. An incredibly vivid, lucid nightmare.
Things continue to get worse. Windows vanish, bricks cover any escape, and he begins to really feel hopeless. Grasping for any semblance of hope, he reaches out to his ex-wife he hasn't spoken to in a year, hallucinates Mr. Olin and begging him,
What do you want from me?
and even turns to an empty Bible despite his lack of belief in any sort of afterlife. Mike is alone, drinking to try and cope, cold, and he even says to Lily,
Don't panic.
I'm supposed to die
He sees his daughter's coffin on fire and is absolutely devastated. Mike is becoming more exhausted and broken. He gets one glimpse of hope when he sees Katie again. He holds her as she dies in his arms, and all he can do is cry. He starts to show that he just can't take anymore. He'd rather make the final escape instead of continuing in this hell he's been put through. Mike Enslin didn't believe in anything but himself. He hated that he filled his daughter's head with thoughts of heaven instead of teaching her to fight through her illness.
We did, and we should have helped her fight.
Oh my God.
Instead of filling her head full of these stories about heavens and the clouds and nirvana and all that bullshit.
He didn't believe in ghosts or supernatural before room 1408, only superstition. He says to Mr. Olin about his cigarette.
No, thank you, I don't smoke. Oh, this, yeah, that's, in case nuclear war breaks out. I gave it up a long time ago. It's part habit, part superstition.
Mike's cigarette represents every wall he has built around him. His wall of disbelief, his wall of hatred towards his father, his wall to block acceptance of his failed marriage, his wall of fear to cope with Katie's death, like the same walls that he can't escape in 1408. When Mike decides to accept his fate, he decides to take the room down with him, and he burns down the walls in 1408. And when he lights his cigarette, he has finally accepted every bit of his life he had been avoiding. Just like the walls that burn in 1408, the walls that Mike built around himself mentally burn away as his cigarette burns. And to put the final nail in the coffin, after Mike finishes the cigarette, he uses the ashtray to break the window that will make the flames grow to an undefeatable length. We all have walls we've built up in our lives. Don't let your walls be the reason you don't get to live your life to the fullest. Sometimes being vulnerable is the best way to fight your demons.